Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes, been on an absolute heater to start this week. In fact, this is the first day, I think, since Sunday where we're not breaking down a commitment for the Miami Hurricanes in the 2026 cycle. Now, these are some of my favorite conversations where you're starting to see some dominoes fall. Dill, specifically at the wide receiver position, where, Miami entered this week with zero commitments in the wide receiver room. Now they're sitting with two. Some unfortunate news this afternoon. Jason Lopez committing to Florida State. Now, look, I'll start with this. Do I think Miami gives up on Jason Lopez? No, I don't. Do I think the Florida State program as a whole could look a lot different come the end of November? I absolutely do. Dill, I think at the end of the day, Van Spafford, what's his best position? Probably going to be working from the slot. You feel really good about Malachi Toney sitting there in the 2025 class. Look, the Miami fans have been rocking with the fellas. They ain't no bigger fan of Jason Lopez than myself. As much as it stings, I feel like Miami will be okay. But where does Miami have to go now? As you continue to see these dominoes fall and start seeing guys trending in different directions, or what are the positions that Miami needs to go out and close on over the next couple of weeks? That's the conversation I want to get into now before we do. And as always, Dill, if there is one thing we have learned over the last couple of years of doing this, there are not many fan bases that are dialed in more to the recruiting trail than the Miami Hurricane fans. When I'm going to start with this conversation, and Dill, this is probably, I'm going to ask you this question at some point. I'm not sure if it's going to be my first question. If you could pick one prospect and go lock them in, who would it be? So have that ready. The Miami Hurricane fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's kick it with this question. The wide receiver board right now. Van Spafford committed, Tyron Evans committed, two different kind of wide receivers that we both really like a lot. You look at some of the other wide receivers, most notably these three on the board. If it were up to you, which one do you think we're going to see in Miami's class in 2026?
I feel like Calvin Russell's probably the best chance to end up in that class. Now, I frankly look at that wide receiver position as probably with what you have in this class, but also some of the young talent that's already been filled up through that pipeline. I
Yeah.
don't feel like wide receiver is a position right now with two guys coming in and probably 5 or 6 guys you really like in their first or second year of college football. I don't know that that's the position. Like Tristan Keys, I mean, he's the best wide receiver in the country, and I don't know that it's close. Like, he is an awesome player in Miami. Anyone across the country would love to have him. Do I think Miami needs to make him the priority maybe that a guy like Lamar Brown should be made? Probably not.
So that's the other question is, like, does Miami choose to push their chips in at the wide receiver position? Now, there's all sorts of different arguments to make here. Like, Dill, my argument to pick Tristan Keys and push your chips in, and I'll start with this. I'm kind of talking around myself real quick. Tristan Keys, I think, is the obvious choice. If you are going to get aggressive for one of these wide receivers, to me, it's Tristan Keys. I've been very vocal that, look, I love the upside that Calvin Russell brings. I think there's probably a couple of years that need to take place once he gets on campus before he's a guy where I look at Tristan Keys and say, look, we saw what Jeremiah Smith did at Ohio State. We saw what Cam Coleman did at Auburn. We saw what those cats up at Clemson did. I look at Tristan Keys and say, I think he could be one of those guys that comes in immediately, gives you wide receiver one-ish production, where I don't think you say the same thing for a guy like Calvin Russell. So if it comes down, and Dill, here's the other argument, and you said Lamar Brown, and I think we're going to get to that conversation in a second. Here's my counter. And look, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. Like, if I were, we can get into it. Like, who's the next priority? Who is the priority for Miami in 2026? Lamar Brown would be my answer too, because it's a very difficult position to address in the portal. I think he's by far the best prospect in that class on the inside of the defensive line. And I think their roster needs it. I mean, you look at it and say, all right, we already feel like we might be a little thin rolling into 2025. Ahmad Moten very well might go to the NFL draft. David Blaze going to the NFL after this year. You got to replace some guys. My counter to that is Dill. Tristan Keys going to be a guy that plays for you year one. So you're going to allocate a lot of resources, but you're immediately going to see dividends from Tristan Keys on the football field. Do you feel the same way about a guy like Lamar Brown?
And again, probably not. And that's where I think you get in maybe the James Johnson versus Lamar Brown
Sure.
conversation. Is James Johnson maybe a little bit more ready to play early,
Mm-hmm.
albeit with a lower ceiling? I
That
just
makes sense.
look, I mean, what do you need young wide receivers for right now? I feel like that pipeline's pretty good. Like you look, they missed on the defensive line to an extent last year. Like they didn't bring in that headline guy,
Yeah,
Dante Simpson, like a good meat and potatoes kind of member of your class,
sure.
member of your football team. But beyond Justin Scott coming from the class 2 years ago, like they don't really have that guy that you look at, oh, this guy's going to be a hammer. And at the end of the day, defensive tackles aren't good in the portal. Like the
Yeah,
defensive tackles in the portal just aren't great players for the most.
that's the argument for Lamar Brown. Like look, if we were kind of operating under the assumption that there's finite resources, you might have to pick one guy to push your chips in like you did with Jackson Campbell. I probably do lean Lamar Brown as well because like Miami wanted to address both of these positions in the portal in the spring. They were able to do at the wide receiver position like decent, even though there weren't a ton of good wide receivers in the portal. You bring in Keelan Merriam from BYU, you bring in Tony Johnson from Cincinnati. Dill, Miami's option at the D tackle spot was like Braxton Felly from Boise State. And look, with all due respect to Braxton Felly, that wasn't like firing us up in terms of the value he could bring to Miami. That was a pure depth, addition. So
Because
I
even
do.
I look at like the value that was placed on a Murad Watson, and Murad Watson's a good
Sure,
player.
sure.
Murad Watson did not dominate for Syracuse. He was just really good, dependable, young defensive lineman who again has some upside. So that's part
Yes.
of your value calculation. But he was no who's the Georgia Tech wide receiver that I'm blanking? Eric
Eric
Singleton.
Singleton.
Eric Singleton was a legitimate hammer at the college
Yeah.
football level. You just don't see any D tackles like that, I don't think. Like David Blaze, a good player for sure, but he is
Yeah.
not like a premier Miami defensive tackle.
Yeah, that's a good way to see. Even going back to the winter, like look at the amount of I mean, there were a few wide receivers that were in the portal that I think will be All Americans. Like I think
Casey Concepcion,
Barry
awesome.
Brown at LSU. I think certainly Eric Singleton at Auburn. Like you had some of the best wide receivers in the country hitting the portal. Where you look at the middle of that defensive line and say, like there were some solid guys going in, but you weren't getting any difference makers. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. And then, Dill, I look at the edge position. This is where I feel okay. And I know it's going to be light. And look, if I'm a Miami fan, it just might be a little light. One, I love Ashari Charles. Number two, Hayden Lowe is going to be freaking awesome football player for you for the next couple of years. You have Marquise Light. I'm kind of going off the dome here, so be patient. But like Marquise Light,
Miami is going to be in a position where they're going to have a harder time retaining all their edge talent than like
sure,
adding new pieces. Because
sure.
you said it, like you look down like a bunch of really good, like Booker Pickett sitting there in like the 4 deep. I mean, he is a super. I know you loved him coming out of high school. He's a really intriguing player, and he
Yeah.
doesn't really look like there's much of a path for him to play like at all, barely. And
Well,
again,
yeah, he's an extenuating, sir, because we knew it was going to be 2 years before he's ready to go. Dill, here's so we kind of ignored Derek Cooper, who it sounds like that might be the biggest target on Miami's board, regardless of position. Let's include Derek Cooper into that conversation here. Where I guess what I'll say is where does Derek Cooper factor in terms of needs? Look, we know that Miami, when they want a guy, they will be very competitive to do so, right? Jackson Campbell, probably the best example. Derek Cooper, Tristan Keys, Lamar Brown, and hey, I'll throw in James.
throw James Johnson in because frankly, if I'm going to rank those 4, it's probably Lamar Brown, James Johnson, Derek Cooper,
Sure,
Tristan.
okay.
I think this should be a 3-man interior defensive line class, and if you can land 2 kind of top end guys,
Yeah.
I think that's really good. Because again, they need to replace that middle of the defensive line. That's to me is priority 1, and I really think at a minimum they should be taking 3 D tackles.
Yeah, and when you factor in like it's by far the hardest position to go and address in the portal, I probably make sense. And Dill, I think the world of Lamar Brown. Like I think he can be. Look, there are certain guys that you just know are going to hold up and do some dirty work, and then there are guys that can be legitimate game records. Guys that go for 10 sacks and go for 15 tackles for last night. I truly think Lamar Brown can be one of those guys. And it does feel like a premium position for Miami, especially like one, we know Mario Cristobal values the line of scrimmage play, right? He's going to pay for guys that he thinks he can win with up front. But number two, just this roster needs it. And so we'll see how the wide receiver board shakes out. I kind of agree with you, Dill. I would like to see a Calvin Russell, Tristan Keys come into the class. But if I'm Mario Cristobal, that shouldn't be at the expense of a Lamar Brown or James Johnson, because I look at that as the most important position for Miami to get right in 2026.
Because look, I think it's like, okay, you want to take a third wide receiver. It doesn't necessarily need to be someone of the Tristan Keys, Calvin Russell ilk. It can be more more of a development piece. Because again, you have two guys, especially with Van Spafford, who are legit players, like top one, like really good, high quality recruits. But also, like, again, you're working with 5 or 6 young guys already on the roster who aren't going anywhere and are really
and Dill, guess what? You feel really good about that. I mean, like, the transfer portal is going to open up come signing day. And you feel really good about some wide receivers hitting the portal too, where I wouldn't go to the portal betting on defensive linemen to be available, because just
everybody's going into the portal needing defensive linemen. It's just really hard to kind of get those guys in your roster.
You're going to have to pay a lot more trying to get them in the portal than you are at the high school ranks. All right, the dominoes are starting to fall. These are some of my favorite conversations that you can have. And Dill, I don't think Miami's going anywhere. Like, I think Miami's got some bullets left in the clip, so to speak, with my metaphor, and I think they're going to use them over the next couple of weeks. And Dill, we all know what Miami likes to do in the month of November, right? All right, we'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.